Hi everyone, I'm Paula Harvey at Tejon Ranch Conservancy, and we're going to do our second lesson in Science Notebooks Nature Journaling today. So you're going to head your next page, which probably is page 4, maybe 3, depends on how much you did with the previous lesson. You're going to head it Notebook Entry Number 1. You can write Lesson 2 down if you'd like. And then you want to start with your heading. And remember what's in a heading. You want the date, the day, the time, your location. If you're indoors, you need to write you're at home or you're indoors. What's the weather like? If it's indoors, what do you think your indoor temperature is? If you're outside, what's the outdoor temperature? If you're outside, is there a breeze? Is it 1 mile an hour? Is it 5 miles an hour? Is there any cloud cover? How much? What's the percentage of that cloud cover? You want to remember to include all of those things. So take your time now and do that. You can pause this video. Okay, so you should have finished number 1 in our lesson for today, heading. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to be observing where you are. If you're outside, I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to sit quietly. Listen, look, smell. Are you sitting? How does it feel where you're sitting? Are you sitting in grass? Are you sitting on a rock? How does it feel? And just take a couple of minutes to silently observe your surroundings. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to observe the thing we're going to study today. So today's object is this. So I'm going to hold this and I'm going to move it around. And while I'm doing that, you're going to observe it. While you're observing it, you're going to be talking to yourself, but aloud. You're going to be saying, I notice this has whatever. I wonder, you're going to ask a question. This reminds me of, and you're going to do this over and over and over and over and over. Just keep chattering away. It's going to look something like this. I notice that this is a skull. I notice that it's missing a part of it. I notice that the teeth in this skull are flat, made for grinding. I notice that it's white. I don't see any flesh or anything on it. I wonder if this is really, really old. I wonder what this is. I wonder where this was found. This reminds me of that small little animal I found in my backyard that had died overnight, only it still had flesh on it. I notice that it's got a huge hole up on the top of it. I notice some of the teeth are missing. I notice the back that goes into the brain area is really quite small. I wonder if this is for the spinal cord. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stand here and just move this around slowly, and I want you to watch it. And I want you to start saying those same things that I just said. Just keep talking about what you notice, what you wonder, and what it reminds you of. Remember, lots of I notice, a lot of I wonders, lots of questions. So you should be talking to yourself right now. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the skull down, and you're going to take your journal. We're going to set the camera up to look at the skull in one position. And I want you to start writing down your ABCs. I notice, I wonder, this reminds me of, and put those in your journal next. So now you have 5 minutes to continue that talk that you did, but this time now you're going to write it down. This is the ABCs of the ABC 1, 2, 3 and the picture. So take 5 minutes, continue to study that skull, and write down, I notice, I notice, I notice, I notice, I wonder, I wonder, I wonder, this reminds me of, this reminds me of. Now, I know that you think after you've done 3 or 4, I notice, that you're done, but you're not. You have 5 minutes. So you need to spend all 5 minutes writing down your ABCs. And that means you don't get done. When 5 minutes is up, you'll stop writing, but you won't stop writing in the middle of it. Now that you have finished writing those ABCs, I wonder, this reminds me of. You've written them down, you spent 5 minutes just writing. Even though you thought you were done and you weren't done, you continued to write. That's excellent. Now we're going to go into the 1, 2, 3s, the metrics, and we're going to do a little bit of measuring. Now it would be easier for you to do this measuring if you had this skull with you, and since you don't, I'm going to do some of the measuring. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out how much this weighs. Well, I notice the back part weighs a lot more than the front part, but I would say this weighs about 3 pounds. That's about it, not more. So you might write that down, about 3 pounds. Then I'm going to take a tape measure and I'm going to do a little bit of measuring. The length from the snout, or the nose area, to the back is 19 inches. Now this tape measure doesn't have metrics. If it did, I would tell you what the metric measurement is, because when you're doing science notebooking, you're supposed to be using the metric system. So keep that in mind. Now I'm going to measure from the eyes and tell you what the width is. This is the widest part of this skull, and that is about 8 inches. I'm curious about these eye sockets. They're huge. Whatever animal this is had big eyes. So I'm going to measure the diameter of the eye socket, and that's 3 inches. All right, and take a look at those teeth. First of all, those are grinding teeth. There's no canines, nothing sharp. So what does that tell you? If it's only grinding teeth, what kind of an animal does that? Is it a carnivore, an omnivore, or is it an herbivore? All right, and I don't think I'm going to measure those teeth. I think that's about it for measurements right now. So now we have done our ABCs and we've done the 1, 2, 3s. So I'm going to ask you to take a look at those I wonders that you wrote down, all those questions. And I want you to take 2 or 3 minutes to do the following. I want you to see if you can answer any of the questions you wrote down, or if you can eliminate any of those questions. For example, if you looked at those teeth and you saw there are no canines, could you eliminate? Maybe you said, is this a bear? Now, can you eliminate whether or not that's a bear? If so, you could answer that anywhere on that paper. While you're answering or eliminating any questions, hypothesize and say, if you were saying, did this animal die a really long time ago? Maybe you could say, could it be that this is a fossil? So use that sentence frame, could it be, and answer some of those hypotheses. Could it be this? Could it be that? They're not necessarily the answers. But what you're doing is you're following the question by asking more questions. And that's what a good scientist does. And as they're asking more questions, they're eliminating the things that just don't make any sense. Could this be a plant? Doesn't make any sense. So you can eliminate that. So take a few minutes now. We'll pause the video and start asking questions, answering questions, and following questions using that sentence frame, could it be? Now that you have worked those questions and eliminated some of them and followed those questions with new questions, the next thing we're going to do, we've done our ABCs, we've done the 1, 2, 3s, it's time to draw. So I want you to keep a couple things in mind when you do that. First of all, your drawing can be a beautiful, fancy, artistic piece of art, or it could be a quick sketch. Just use your pencil. Or it could be a diagram, which you're going to label. So for example, you could draw this and then have this big circle right here and then label it eye socket. Keep in mind a little bit of geometry will go a long way when you're drawing. And by that I mean, when you take a look at this, think about two shapes, a shape next to a shape. This is kind of a rectangle right here. And this is kind of a triangle. So you could start with your pencil, just a rectangular shape, and then a triangular shape right next to it. And that would be the beginning of that drawing. Keep in mind about positive and negative spaces. So think that the positive spaces are the bone structure. It's the stuff that you can feel. And the negative spaces would be the holes and the darker spots. And so while you're drawing, if you're just using pencil, or if you're going to use colored pencil as well, notice that this area right here is going to be darker than this area here. Notice that there are shadows on this. There will be some places that are a little darker than others, and you're going to want to shade that a little bit with your pencil. So go ahead and get started. Now, before you start, think about this. We have taken a bunch of pictures from different angles, and those are available to you on the website, tejonconservancy.org. And you can choose a different angle other than this profile if you wish to. While you are drawing, keep your ABCs in mind. As you draw, you're going to really be carefully, in detail, looking, observing those pictures. And as you do, you're going to discover things that you didn't notice initially. So while you're doing that, continue to write your I notice and I wonder, this reminds me of. Add tons of those to your journal, all over the place. We're almost done with this first journal entry. So we started with the heading. We spent some time just observing, being really quiet, taking a look at things, listening, using all your senses. And then you spoke to yourself. I noticed this, I wonder about this. You spoke a lot. And then you started writing the things that you spoke about and did ABC, I notice, I wonder, this reminds me of. 1, 2, 3, we did weight and we did measurements, the length and the width. And then we looked at those questions, those I wonder questions, and we did some hypothesizing. Could it be? And we eliminated some of the questions that were asked that we now know that can't possibly be the answer. But we didn't answer all those questions, and some of it you'll research later, and some questions may not ever get answered. The purpose here isn't necessarily to answer all the questions, but it's to be curious. All right, and then we drew. We did a diagram or a sketch or a beautiful drawing. If we did a diagram, you labeled it. We used geometry to construct the skull, remembering a shape, starting with a rectangle, and putting it next to another shape, that triangle. And we looked at positive and negative spaces, so we had the light and the dark. While you were sketching, you started observing so carefully that you came up with more things that you noticed, and more questions that you had, and maybe more connections that reminded you of something. So you kept writing those in your journal entry. Now it's time to do that reflection. How are you feeling? I always notice that after I've done a sketch or a drawing, I feel really good, but I also feel really calm. There's a reason for that. And so think about how you're feeling right now. And start writing some kind of reflection. Remember what that is. It could be a diary entry. It could be a sketch. It could be, lyrics to a song. It could be a poem. It could be a short story. But you're going to write a reflection. And once you're done with that reflection, just take a couple minutes. Don't do it for a real long time. Go to your table of contents and add Lesson 2, Notebook Entry 1 to that table of contents. Well, I'm pretty much done with this journal entry today. I want to share it with you, and it should look a little bit like yours, but we're all individuals, so we're all going to do our journal entries a little differently. Some of us want to have them really fancy and colorful. Some of us just want to write down the basic facts. So let me just share with you, and remember, we're just looking at the elements, not necessarily how they're written down. So I started with my heading, so I've got the date, the day, the time, where I am. I'm in Fraser Park at the Tejon Conservancy office. It's currently 75 degrees indoors. So I looked at this skull and I wrote some I notices and I wrote some I wonders. Could this be as a question? I wonder, here's another, a wonder. This reminds me of, and notice that I underlined those just to make sure that you could see that I wrote these down as my ABCs. You don't have to underline them or box them, but I did that for this particular case. Here's what this reminds me of. Now, all of this under here, I wrote as I was drawing my sketch. I chose only to use a pencil today and to do a really quick sketch. And I added things like, I wonder what the holes are in the back of this indentation. So I was looking at the indentation in here and noticed there's a bunch of holes. That's what this is supposed to be right here. There's the eye socket. I continued even while I was waiting to videotape this and started adding some more things that I saw. I could draw this picture for hours and hours and still see more new things. So a lot more I notices, I wonder what that zigzag seam is in the bone in the front of the eyes. Why is that there? So I drew that over here. And then I wrote a very short reflection. I think I need to practice shading and shadows. This skull is interesting. I think it was once part of a living being. It's got such complicated construction. The more I studied this, the more complicated it looked to me. Seeing different plates, for example, and then even there, here's the eye socket, but there's all kinds of stuff going on in here that I didn't draw on my picture. But you'll see that I have all of the elements. I've got the heading, I've got my ABCs, and I have my 1, 2, 3s and my reflection. Now that you've completed your entire journal entry, don't forget to go back to the table of contents and add this page to it.